Hello and welcome back to Lifespan Development. In this video, we'll be talking about different theories of development. We will go over psychoanalytic, cognitive, behavioral and cognitive or social cognitive, ethological and ecological theories, and an eclectic theoretical orientation. So the scientific method is essentially a four-step approach that can be used to obtain accurate information. So this would be conceptualizing a process or problem, collecting some data, analyzing that data, and drawing conclusions. Yes, these are the very basic steps. There are many more complex versions that are out there that exist, but for this conversation, this will work for us. So what is a theory? What is a hypothesis or hypotheses, and are they related? A theory is an interrelated, coherent set of ideas that helps to explain phenomena and facilitate predictions. A hypothesis is a specific assumption or prediction that can be tested to determine its accuracy. This theory or a theory may suggest the hypothesis. Psychoanalytic theories, as developed originally by Sigmund Freud, they describe development as primarily unconscious and heavily colored by emotion. Behavior is a surface characteristic, and the symbols or the symbolic workings of the mind has to be analyzed to understand behavior. Early experiences with parents are emphasized. In Freud's theory, through his work, he became convinced that the problems in development were a result of experiences earlier in life. He defined 5 stages of psychosexual development. Adult personality, in his opinion, is determined by the way we resolve conflict between the sources of pleasure or conflict at each stage and the demands of reality. So we will go over his stages here, and we do talk about them briefly in this course. We don't take them as literally as he put them out, but we do use them kind of as a tool for building on and analyzing and acknowledging the new and other modern theories that we'll kind of get to. So for Freud, he had 5 stages. Birth to 1.5 was the oral stage, and his opinion was that infants' pleasure centers were on the mouth. 1.5 to 3 years was anal stage, where child's pleasure focused on the anus. 3 to 6 years was the phallic stage, where we were focused on genitals. 6 years to puberty was a latency stage where the child would repress sexual interest and develop social and intellectual skills. And puberty onward was the genital stage, a time of sexual reawakening, and sexual pleasure becomes something outside of the family. So let's look at this from a modern perspective. When we consider his 5 stages of life, if we look at it that way, his 5 stages of development, the only input or interaction, or I guess the main input or interaction that infants have between birth and 1.5 years is about nutrition. Of course, there's other social things going on, but you can kind of maybe see where he was coming from in focusing on the one thing that infants do, especially in the very beginning, right? The very pretty much first year of their lives. Everything is about them eating and getting nutrition that way. So of course there would be a focus on how they're connecting with people, because that is through eating. So 1.5 to 3 is where children are gaining a little bit of independence. Maybe they're potty training. Maybe they're progressing a little bit on their own at 3, or as they get from 2 to 3, they start to kind of toddle away from their parent a little, exploring their own in the room, in their play area. So their focus may be a little different, right? It's not just on nutrition, it's also on some other small ways that they start to become independent. Then the 3 to 6 years, in this stage, he talks about the focus being on the genitals. What we know is that from 3 to 6 years, we're going through a lot of developmental milestones and kind of sorting through some growing physical as well as cognitive situations. The latency stage, according to Freud, is where children repress sexual interest and develop social and intellectual skills. So for us now, from a modern perspective, we do not put 6 years to puberty in one stage. We kind of break that up a little bit more. But in general, we do understand that from 6 to puberty, children are developing relationships outside of the family. They're making friends at school, they're making friends in their social circle. So it does make sense a little bit that he would kind of put that range in one kind of package. Then puberty onward, he talks about sexual reawakening and the source of sexual pleasure coming from outside the family, or the source of interaction in general coming from outside the family. And it is true that from puberty onward, we are a lot more independent from our family than we were previously. So if we take out the kind of sexual underpinnings that he placed in these stages, we can maybe kind of, out of that context, if we put it in a more developmental context and take out those references, it does make a little bit of sense how he kind of split up people's development. So that being said, let's move on to more modern theories. So Erikson is someone that we will talk about over and over throughout this course. According to Erikson, the primary motivation for behavior is social. So personality and developmental changes occur throughout the lifespan. Both early and later experiences are important. So this is a key point here. Erikson said, okay, yes, childhood is important, but also everything else is important too. And that's really a key takeaway from this. So for Erikson's theory, he had 8 stages that he decided were what kind of made up our human development, and each represented some sort of crisis that needed to be resolved. So trust versus mistrust would be the first year of infancy. Autonomy versus shame and doubt would be 1 to 3 years. Initiative versus guilt would be 3 to 5 years. Industry versus inferiority would be 6 years to puberty. And then identity versus identity confusion, which we'll talk about later in this course, 10 to 20 years. And then intimacy versus isolation for 20s and 30s. And then generativity versus stagnation in the 40s and 50s. And then integrity versus despair for 60s onward. Now, we will talk about these in much more in depth as we go through the course, but for this introduction purpose for today, just understand, you can see how he broke these into, he broke the lifespan up into more pieces than Freud did, and he also took out those sexual underpinnings, which may seem a lot more logical to us today, right? So in the first year of infancy, does a child have a good sense of trust or connection with parent or guardian, or no, right? And then 1 to 3, are they brave? Are they a brave kid, or are they fearful? Do they have shame? Do they doubt themselves? Or do they have some autonomy to explore their space? Then 3 to 5, same, right? We're talking about a little bit more initiative versus guilt. Are they able to kind of stretch out their exploration a little more, or are they hesitant to do so? Then 6 years to puberty, we're talking about industry versus inferiority. So how is this child developing in the context of relating to other people? Are they exploring? Are they creating ideas and thoughts and solving problems on their own? How well do they do that, right? There's a progression of this. Then identity versus identity confusion, which, like I said, we get into this quite a bit later in the course. But for today, what is your sense of self, right? From 10 to 20 or 10 to early 20s, we're trying, maybe older than that for some of us, we're trying to figure out exactly who we are as a person and in the world, right? Where is our place? Then intimacy versus isolation would be the 20s and 30s. That's more like you kind of maybe have figured out more about who you are at that point, but you're trying to determine your place in the world, right? So now you know how you are. Now, are you in a partnership? Are you not in a partnership? What is your idea of career or family? What's going on, right? So this is that stage. Then the 40s and 50s, generativity versus stagnation. So are you chugging along and making things work, or are you still continuing to grow in your career and personally as you progress through this stage? Then 60s and onward with integrity versus despair, we're kind of thinking about, are we reflecting back on this long life with a positive thought? Are we happy? Are we thinking, oh, our contributions were good, we made good effort at different points in our lives and the results are fruitful? Or are we having conflict? Are we thinking, oh, wow, there's things I should have done that I didn't? Maybe raising children in a way that maybe as an older person, you feel like maybe you made some errors before. So really, this is that reflection. Is it like everything went great, or is it, wow, I really feel like I need to reconcile for some choices I made as I was progressing through my life to this point? So let's talk about evaluating these psychoanalytic theories. So these are good because they have an emphasis on a developmental framework, family relationships, and the unconscious aspects of the mind. That's positive. But some criticisms here are that there's kind of a lack of scientific support for Freud. None of his work is repeatable. None of it is documented in a way that we might document some studies today. So that's kind of tough. Then there's too much emphasis on sexual underpinnings, especially for Freud's theories. We agree that those stages may be stages that kind of work for defining how the lifespan kind of sorts itself out, but lots of sexual we don't need that. That doesn't work for us today from a modern perspective. And also, both of these theories have an image of people that is pretty negative. We might prefer a more positive look and say, what has this human achieved at this point? Not what have they not achieved yet, if that makes sense. Let's talk now about some cognitive theories. Piaget is a cognitive developmental theorist that we will talk about, like Erikson. We talk about Piaget quite a bit in this course. For Piaget, there were 4 stages of cognitive development for children as they actively construct their understanding of the world around them. And later in this course, we watch some great videos about this and see some kids kind of progressing through different scenarios as they age. So the sensory motor stage is birth to 2 years of age. The pre-operational stage is 2 to 7. Concrete operational is 7 to 11, and formal operational is 11 years through adulthood. So 2 processes underlie this kind of theory: organization and adaptation. So here we can look at a little bit more detail of these stages. So the sensory motor stage, the infant constructs an understanding of the world by coordinating sensory experiences with physical actions. An infant progresses from reflexive, instinctual action at birth to the beginning of symbolic thought towards the end of this stage. From 2 to 7, we're at pre-operational, and here the child begins to represent the world with words and images. These reflect increased symbolic thinking, and they go beyond the connection of the sensory and formation of physical action. The concrete operational stage is where the child can now use logic to reason about concrete events and classify objects into different sets. The formal operational stage is where the adolescent can reason in more abstract, idealistic, and logical ways in general. So, according to Piaget, how a child thinks, not how much they know, determines the child's stage of cognitive development. Let's talk about Vygotsky's socio-cultural cognitive theory for a second. His theory emphasizes how culture and social interaction guide and are inseparable from our cognitive development. Also, we have the information processing theory. This emphasizes that individuals manipulate information, monitor it, and strategize about it. Central to this theory are the processes of memory and thinking. Here, we have a comparison of the information processing of humans and computers. Some psychologists who study cognition often use a computer analogy to explain how humans process information. The brain is analogous to the computer's hardware, and cognition is analogous to the computer's software. Let's evaluate these theories. Contributions include that it's a positive view of development. We love this. We're glad to have a positive view here. An emphasis also is on the active constructing of understanding. Criticisms of these theories include some skepticism about the pureness of Piaget's stages. Sometimes they're a little vague and tough to kind of prove if someone's in one or another. Also, there's inadequate attention to individual variations, and that's kind of a challenge. Behavioral and social cognitive theories are where development is described in terms of behaviors learned through interactions with our surroundings. Skinner's operant conditioning is one of these. This is where development can be described in terms of behaviors that are learned through interactions with the environment. Bandura's social cognitive theory emphasizes behavior, environment, and cognition as key factors in development. Relations between behavior, person, and cognition, and environmental factors are reciprocal. Using forethought, individuals guide and motivate themselves by creating action plans, formulating goals, and visualizing positive outcomes of their actions. Later, we'll talk about the Bobo doll experiment, which was super interesting, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming module. Here is a graphic kind of showing how these interactions happen kind of both ways. Behaviors affect a person's cognition. Cognition can be affected by environment. All of these things kind of work together. So basically, personal characteristics have some sway over how you experience your environment. Evaluating these theories, contributions include an emphasis on scientific research and environment as determinants of behavior. We like this, but some criticisms are there's little emphasis on cognition in Skinner's theory, and there's inadequate attention paid to developmental changes. The ethological theory is stressing that behavior is strongly influenced by biology. It's tied to evolution, and it's characterized by experiences during critical or sensitive periods. Lorenz did some research with gray-leg geese, and he basically helped bring ethology to prominence by showing that the developmental importance of the imprinting behavior of geese. So a critical period is a certain very early point at which imprinting must take place. John Bowlby is another researcher that we'll talk about during this course, and he was the person who talked about attachment theory. He determined that attachment to a caregiver over the first year of life has important consequences for optimal social relationship development throughout the lifespan. Contributions of ethological theory include a focus on the biological and evolutionary basis of development and the use of careful observations in naturalistic settings. Some criticisms, though, are that there's too much emphasis on biological foundations. The critical and sensitive period concepts might be too rigid. Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory is that development reflects the influence of 5 environmental systems. We have a microsystem, which is a setting in which the individual lives and helps to construct. We have a mesosystem, which is the relations between the microsystem or connections between different contexts. Then we have the exosystem, which is a link between the social setting in which the individual has a passive role and their immediate context. Then there's a macrosystem, which is the culture in which an individual lives. And then the chronosystem, which is the patterning of the environmental events and transitions over the life course of a person. And all of these are affected by each other and by events that are occurring over time. So then the next level out, we see family, health services, neighborhood play areas, peers, school. Then the next one out, we see neighbors, social welfare, mass media, friends of family, right? So extended out. And then the macro system is attitudes and ideologies of the culture that person's living in. So please take a minute to look at this graphic. The center of the concentric circles contains the individual, reflecting the characteristics of age, sex, gender, health, and other personal attributes. Surrounding the center is the first circle, the microsystem, containing areas of interaction, including family, school, the neighborhood play area, peers, health services, and church groups. Surrounding the microsystem is the third circle, containing the mesosystem, representing the interactions of any 2 microsystems. Here, bidirectional arrows connect microsystems as in examples, such as family and school or neighborhood and peers. The fourth circle, the exosystem, contains outside entities, such as friends of the family, neighbors, legal services, social welfare services, and mass media. The exosystem factors exert influence over mesosystem relationships. This is illustrated with arrows pointing from the exosystem to the mesosystem. The exosystem is also influential. Arrows are pointing outward on the 5th and outer circle, the macrosystem. It contains attitudes and ideologies of the culture that influence the exosystem. In addition to the 5 circles, there's an arrow illustrating change over time called the chronosystem. Time Here, referring to the socio-historical conditions and time since life events, creates the chronosystem, which is the patterning of events, of environmental events and transitions over the life course, or socio-historical conditions. Contributions of the ecological theory include that the systematic examination of macro and micro dimensions of environmental systems, we like this. We like this close examination of all of this environmental factoring. So this attention to connections between environmental systems is important. And there's an emphasis on a range of social contexts besides family that influence a child's development. And this theory takes that into consideration. Some criticisms, though, are that there is inadequate attention to biological factors. There's too little emphasis on cognition and cognitive factors. Here is a chart showing a summary of theories and issues in lifespan development. Please feel free to pause the video or check this out in Canvas. So an eclectic theoretical orientation does not follow any one approach. It selects from each theory whatever is considered its best features. And that's what we do today. Most modern perspectives on development consider pieces of each of these theories that work, so that we can collectively have a great idea of what to expect or what we should expect in human development at each stage. This allows for seeing the study of development as it actually exists. All of these perspectives have quality pieces to them, but separately, they don't really hit all the points, right? But together, they work really well. So different theorists making different assumptions, stressing different empirical problems, and discovering different information using different strategies. This is very helpful to helping us gain a great perspective on the lifespan and how we progress through it.